perspective, and going to get into some of our nitty-gritty on kind of our first experiences in Canada and what we saw and how that impacted those projects for us, and what we changed kind of going forward. Perfect. So just give you an overview of our company so you understand what we do and how our business model in Canada works. What is our Canada business strategy? Look at 3 quick kind of case studies of projects that we've done. One in kind of a sale of capital equipment, one in a lease of capital equipment, and one in recent formation of a strategic partnership and how we went about this. And last is just share some valuable resources that we had throughout all these projects. Okay, so our company established in 1999 up in Everett, Washington, about 55 employees. We design, manufacture, deploy, service water treatment systems internationally, and when I say internationally, I mostly mean northern Canada to South America, with only a couple projects in those regions, and starting to go to the Middle East maybe in the next year. So newbie to international stage, really in the last 3 to 4 years. Our focus is really development and commercialization of electrochemical water treatment methods. So essentially, anywhere that we're using electricity to create a reaction in water, applying electricity over different metal plates to create reactions and treat water. If you've heard of us before, maybe seen us at previous WCT events, you may know that in 2010 we signed a global licensing agreement with Halliburton for the natural gas market, and a lot of stuff on the news about the fracking space. So that's been a big driver for our business, essentially treating the water from the natural gas flowback industry. Here's what our product looks like. Containerized units here. This is essentially a 40-foot shipping container. We would build all of our systems in these types of containers and ship them wherever they may go. Typically dirty and remote locations. So we started here in Washington, and we're really just a regional small company for the first 5, 6, 7 years. Expanded across the U.S., Colorado, Pennsylvania, New York. And recently, as I said, kind of got into Canada and Colombia. Although all those pictures kind of look relatively the same, despite where they are in the world. So, not a lot of photography interest from my side on the market. That's why we at least keep the blue box. Otherwise, everything would be brown. Okay, so why do clients purchase our products? Essentially, there's 2 drivers for why we're in business. One is water is a component of how they do business, essentially extracting rare earth minerals or oil from the ground, and so they have to manage that water and essentially try to recycle it when possible to save costs. Second is regulations. They're driven by government to comply with certain regulations and meet discharge of water into surface waters or public waters or and sometimes it's a combination of these 2. And then you really have someone that needs to do something. So in general, typically the regulated industries are where you would expect major city centers, urban populations, along coastlines, like here in Seattle, San Francisco Bay, Chesapeake Bay, etc. And then you've got the same thing pretty much in Canada. As Richard pointed out, you've got all your same city centers right across the border. So Ontario, Vancouver, similar sorts of regulation issues kind of coming up in these areas that we're starting to see. And then in the center of the country, most of your resources, the natural gas space here in the U.S., and then on the other side of the border, you've got more of the oil sands and more mining, a little bit of mining in the U.S. too. So, overall, very similar. It kind of mirrors the U.S. for us in the type of market, and it's really been, it's just kind of taken us a long time to get there, but it's a very natural fit for our business model and what we do. Okay, so jumping into kind of these 3 quick case studies here. This was our first project in Canada. This client, Pure Metal Galvanizing, they operate a zinc galvanizing operation. So all the fencing you see outside are metal roofs where they dip it in molten zinc to preserve it for 50 years, so it lasts a long time. We actually happened to meet this company at a U.S. conference, a technical industry conference for their industry, and it was funny, as I was going over these 3 case studies yesterday, I realized that all of them were from conferences that we went to. And from my side, being on marketing, the executives always saying, nothing ever comes out of these things. And I was looking at these last night, I was like, all 3 of these projects happen to be from conferences that we went to, and just didn't realize it. So if any of you were in that case as well, hopefully you're also getting similar success. We're in Ontario here. This client, we met in about 2008, and it was a long process. It was about 3 years from when we met them to when they actually purchased the equipment and installed it. They had about a year and a half worth of regulatory kind of waiting, the Ministry of Environment, two kind of oversight agencies during the project, the Ministry of Environment in Ontario and the Canadian Standards Association. Essentially, they had to get approval from Ministry of Environment first, and that was about a year and a half, 2 years, and then another year just kind of going through their own logistics stuff. So we're long cycle purchases here. So the nitty gritty, kind of what were the big issues that we saw pre-project, during project, post-project? First one, inbound shipping documentation. We spent tons of time wrapping our heads around how to get our product into Canada, and at the end of the day, we didn't realize that the client had purchased capital equipment from US companies many times before, and they had people in their company that knew how to handle all of that paperwork, no problem. And really, we should have just handed it off to them much earlier, and they would have said, oh, we'll handle it, no big deal. So that was something we probably didn't need to spin our wheels as much on. For our product, we sell a powered product, right? So power supplies are different in Canada, so if you do something with power, that changed the way our components had to be built, and 600 volt versus 480 volt in the US. Work permits. So this was one we talked to about 8 different people in the consulate in Vancouver, BC, many thanks to them, before we figured out what we were going to do. At first we thought we might need to get work visas to go up and actually install our product, but they said really you just need their recommendation to us was to get a written invitation from our client that this was a proprietary technology that only we could install and service for them during this short period, and that's where our people were going to be coming in and doing work in Canada. And that flew just fine and was great, and so less tubes for us too. It's a great recommendation. A couple things during as we tried to go up there and install it. Bringing analytical testing equipment into the country was difficult. So we treat water, so we have equipment that kind of tests how we're doing, and that involves small kind of testing device and chemical reagents, and wanted nothing to do with that. So they made us kind of leave that stuff at the border, and then we had to kind of procure it on the other side, from the local Canadian supplier. This was an interesting thing, kind of things you can bring across from now. The other was the Canadian Standards Association. First experience with this group, similar to like a UL or other groups, but ASTM, something like that. But very meticulous, and didn't really have any reciprocity with what we had already got in Washington and other places in the U.S. So like a UL 508 certification, they said that's nice, but we're going to do our own thing. So if you have some of these where you're installing a product and it's going to involve permit cycles, you realize that very very different in how to understand that. Post-project, our product involves some consumables, so essentially they get used up, that they're proprietary, that we ship to our client back and forth. Typically we try and have our clients ship us the spent ones so that we can kind of redo them and then ship them back to them, but in this case it wasn't economical for our clients to ship those consumables back and forth across the border based on the charges, and so that part of it kind of went away and then increased their O&M, I mean just very slightly, but something to kind of consider if you have a product that needs to kind of go back and forth in perpetuity. Last one was tools. We brought all of our work tools to do our product installation in our shipping container over the border, and then when we tried to bring them back, they're like, oh no, you bought these tools in Canada and you're trying to bring them to the US. And we're like, no, that's not really what we did. They're like, well, you should have shipped them in their own box with their own entrance visa. I was like, okay, well, so eventually we had to actually drive across the border, pick them up out of New York, and then bring them back. But, so, yeah. 2 minutes, all right, so, jumping ahead, just examples of that installation there, nice and cold. Okay, next one, Capital Lease. This was a confidential oil client. I don't know if anyone spends any time in Google Maps, Northern Canada, very fun thing. I pulled some of these pictures off roughly where we were. But north of Wabasca, Alberta, we met this client at the Canadian Technical Conference, introduced to one of our Canadian strategic partners, 5-month pilot project, a couple of the oversight agencies there. So some of the issues. So in this time around with the CSA, we knew we needed to do something different. The client was too high profile for us to get on site and have anything go amiss with CSA. So we actually found that there was a local Washington State certified CSA inspector who could come to our facility in Everett, view our unit, do all the paperwork that say it met CSA certification, send that up to our client's third-party CSA certifier. He signed off on it so that when we shipped our box up to Canada, everything was totally fine. Way more smooth. So think about maybe local support, that people that have already done this stuff. Another one, shipping tariff. It was going to cost about $18,000 in tariffs to get our unit across the border. We found that either we originally thought we were going to